talking about the virus. Children pick up on stress and may respond in different ways than adults. Love, attention, and routine can make them feel more secure. For more tips from Seattle children's experts to support your family as you cope, live, and learn during COVID, follow Seattle Children's on Facebook or visit seattlechildrens.org. Schools are closed, and everyone is talking about the virus. Children pick up on stress and may respond in different ways than adults. Love, attention, and routine can make them feel more secure. For more tips from Seattle children's experts to support your family as you cope, live, and learn during COVID, follow Seattle Children's on Facebook or visit seattlechildrens.org. Schools are closed, and everyone is talking about the virus. Children pick up on stress and may respond in different ways than adults. Love, attention, and routine can make them feel more secure. For more tips from Seattle children's experts to support your family as you cope, live, and learn during COVID, follow Seattle Children's on Facebook or visit seattlechildrens.org.
Hi, I want to thank you for joining us today for ParentMap's webinar, From Chaos to Calm, Resilient Parenting in Time of Crisis, featuring Dr. Laura Kastner. You guys are all in for a treat. My name's Elaine Sulkin, and I'm the publisher of ParentMap. And for those of you not familiar with ParentMap, we are a content-rich resource devoted to assisting you in your parenting journey, whether it's with our monthly print publication. This is the May Mother's Day issue. Or we also publish a number of book titles, including Dr. Kastner's very popular Getting to Calm. We also host an award-winning website, so visit parentmap.com, and produce dozens of live and now virtual events. So we're super happy to have you with us. A few housekeeping topics before we turn it over to Dr. Kastner. Today's webinar is being recorded, so it may be republished for educational promotional use, and we wanted to make sure you knew that. We're going to email everybody who registered a link back to this so that you can rewatch it and share it. During Dr. Kastner's talk, please feel free to send questions. There's a toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom where you can propose questions, and we will curate those at the end and use those. And we couldn't do this without you. So thank you for zooming in to hear Dr. Kastner. You're truly in for a treat. And thank you for joining our virtual events. We're very excited to have more virtual events coming. We have Dr. Christine Carter on May 12th. So we hope you'll join for that as well. We want to thank, we could not do this without our presenting sponsors, Alto Pharmacy, welcome, and also our longtime partner, Seattle Children's Hospital. Also, we want to thank Child and Teen Solutions for joining us as a sponsor as well. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Dr. Laura Kastner. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. And I want to thank Elaine and Carolyn and Brenna and Patty and the whole crew at ParentMap, and what a contribution to the community, especially in these difficult times, to get all onboarded with this kind of curriculum and this kind of venue. So thank you to everybody. I thought I'd start by actually talking a little bit about my situation, because I just want to get a little personal. This is supposed to be personal. I do not have children at home. My children are grown, but I am surrounded by the stress of the pandemic. My son is a public defender in New York, and of course he's doing courtroom as we speak from his little apartment. He's about to go back, and 3 judges have died, and 170 court workers have become infected. So mommy's nervous. My daughter lives in the Bay Area, and she works for a big nonprofit worldwide that funds climate solutions for grassroots, and they're the same people in the global south that are affected by the pandemic. So she's got some secondary trauma going on. I live with a physician, my husband of 30 years, who works at Swedish, is on call, and his office is in the annex that has 3 floors of COVID. So I have to ask him every day, even though I'm trying to behave myself, did you wash your hands? Again. And we share the house with an anesthesiologist, his 4th year fellowship, and he's working on the COVID ICU. And I see 30 families online like this, sitting right here all week. And I will tell you, none of my family is as stressed as the families I work with. None of them. Even the COVID ICU doc, 2 floors up, would say he is not as stressed as most of you. It is most hard for parents at home, trying to juggle everything, essential workers trying to juggle everything, people that are suffering from racial, economic, and social impact of this. So let's be clear, we all have stress, but there are gradations of stress, even amongst everybody that's looking here. So I want to just acknowledge that. And thank you all for leaning in and being with us. So at this point, I'm going to do my little screen share so that you can see my slides. And they're all about this subject. How does this look from there? Is it good? There, a little bit better. Okay, so yes, this is our topic. You already know it, and I'm going to go straight to my topics that I'm going to review today. They're going to be 3. One is actually a lot of what I wrote about for ParentMap already. I call it spur, lurch, and cope. And so I'll go over that a little bit. I then want to talk about the components of resilience and how we develop resilience. And then I want to talk about families working to balance acceptance of themselves exactly how they are, their baseline, and trying to do a little bit better. We're all trying to do a little bit better. So that'll be my third chunk. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing that happened probably last week of February, first week of March, now 8 weeks ago, was the shock and awe of this really does affect me and mine and all of us. And it's, technically it's an amygdala hijack. It's a call to action. It's the trigger that says, I've got to save myself. I've got to save my family, right? It's fight, flight, freeze. So there's all sorts of energy and adrenaline to sort of move to adjust to the pandemic. Soon after that, it was probably a little bit of that bargaining with God, like, oh, it's not going to be that bad. I mean, I'm not going to lose like a third of my 401k, or certainly my husband won't have to work at home, or my wife won't have to work, or my partner, surely the children won't be at home with homeschooling. And then all of a sudden, the waves of information come forward, and we start to understand, yes, this means a big change for everyone, and we need to respond. Okay, the next stage is lurch, and I think actually we're in a second phase of lurch right now. There is something that definitely happened in the Seattle area May 1st. You heard about it on the radio. They were saying, what's going on? We already know that Governor Inslee is going to go for the next phase of shelter in place, but people started driving, 60% more cars on the road, and kids are starting to play when they're not supposed to play on the playground. And so people are really getting sick of it again. There was sort of this call to action, and we're going to just really be good sports. And then all of a sudden, we realize this is really a long haul, and I'm sick of it. So, there's both things going on. So the lockdown was first 2 weeks of March. We all had to get ready to, get groceries, prepare for homeschooling, prepare to work at home, all the rest. Of course, we had to engineer the urgency with our kids, especially for social distancing, the misnomer for physical distancing. And we had to arrange for social closing, if you will, in terms of internet connection with friends and family. Then the risk assessment, which really can create a lot of friction in the home because parents can disagree about what level of risk, right? Can you really walk, without a mask, or can you trust people to be 6 feet, or should it be 10 feet? We all heard about that choir. Somehow the aerosol got to people. How much safe is safe? So couples can disagree, friends can disagree. Our kids are definitely going to disagree. So risk assessment, and that is going to keep going as we let up on some of the restrictions. There are going to be some families that let up this much, how about this much? And you're going to see some real fracturing in the community around different tolerance of risk. Checking is actually, I borrowed that word from the world of obsessive compulsive disorder, because you've heard about those people that wash their hands all the time, or check the stove, or check the stove and have to return home to check this. And it kind of goes with the tyranny, if you will, of obsessive compulsive disorder. And then we all get a little version of this. I come home from the grocery store and I have to go, did I take my gloves off before I wash this? And do I leave it in the garage and bring it in? And did I Clorox this? And what about the recycling, the door handle to my recycling closet? So we all become a little OCD during this time. And of course, it's functional to some degree, right? When it's usurping a lot of our energy because we're just worrying, the plague of what ifs, I call it, then it's not functional. So we're all having to sort of deal with the obsessive compulsive piece of this about viral load and viral worry. And then of course the hoarding. We've got a new version of that as of this week in terms of meat. You've probably heard about it or experienced it. I experienced my problem with it about 3 weeks ago when I wanted to make my tamale pie. And I went to the store and there was no corn on the cob. There was no frozen corn, no cans of corn. Maybe you need corn so badly. And I thought, get a grip. So you don't have meat, you don't have corn in the can. But we all get this sort of frazzle about, I won't have enough. So hoarding makes sense. And it's not a pretty picture. One of my patients offered me an N95, one of those highfalutin kind of masks, and because she had like 100 extra, she's an artist and works with a lot of dust. And I said, I think you're supposed to take those to the hospital. She goes, no, you know, I care about you. I want you to have one. And then I said no about 3 times. And then I felt so guilty because, you know, I think that's called virtue signaling. I said, oh, you know, aren't you supposed to take this to the hospital? I felt like such a cad because it was out of caring. But we're all sort of conflicted around, oh, I want to have some goodies. I want to have my oximeter. I want to have my N95 if I can't, but then shouldn't we share, or, you know, the whole, so, you know, it's a both and. All the way through this presentation, we'll be talking about both and. We want to get the provisions, but when are we hoarding? So, you know, another thing to feel guilty and conflicted about. Okay, now for the rest of the time, we're really going to be talking about coping. And I have an acronym for this and one more coming up. And COPE is standing for these 4 things. You know, we really are going to be constantly working on connections, social closing, right? So, you know, you want to figure out how can we stay in touch with grandparents, how you're having Zoominies, you're having quarantinis, you're having family gatherings, you might be getting together with your high school friends. It is really cool how many people are connecting with friends that they've had their whole lives. It's a beautiful thing. Then you got to figure out how to put it in the organized plan of the schedule, right? So everybody's getting organized. One of the first things that happened was, how do you do homeschooling, right? And so people start, this is a really nice picture of kids that are cooperating, and people had high hopes that, you know, we could just have 6 hours or 4 hours, whatever your school plan is, and I'm going to be supportive. I'm going to bring them milk and cookies and be Glinda. But often we turn into the Wicked Witch of the West with too much monitoring. The kids like to sleep in. It can eat. Whenever you try to be Glinda, there's more likelihood that you're going to turn out to be the Wicked Witch of the West. Because to me, Glinda is impossible. Do you remember how just perfect she was? So, you know, all the way through this talk, I want to say, let's not let perfect be the enemy of the good enough, right? So the homeschooling can be a mess for some people and easy for others. We don't want social comparison. You know, one person can be really doing well on homeschooling and the next one will be not so good at having fun. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. But organizing the schedule is obviously a huge part of it. I'm going to talk about routines in a minute. Okay, perspective. We want to have some good times in this year. And I'm really going to be talking about a year. You know, we know that we won't have, it will never be back to normal in the same way that after September 11th, we don't have a normal airport, right? There'll be differences probably for a long time. Some good differences, you know, if we can work from home and share parenting more effectively, that would be a wonderful change. Or stay out of our cars more, that would be a wonderful change. But one of the things I tell my clients, the families I work with, is wouldn't it be great if by the end of this year, by the time we have vaccinations and we really have social freedom again, wouldn't it be great to look back on this year and say, you know, I'm proud of how we handled this. You know, it's a little bit more than silver linings. I'll talk about that in a minute. But, you know, this family depicted with the little, rock band, that looks really good. You might not have a rock band. Your kids might hate each other right now, but you might be able to stay up with your schoolwork. And maybe one of them will learn a skill. You know, they'll learn, you know, how to do chess online, or they'll learn how to play bridge in your family. We're all going to have different things that work well and not so well, but that's kind of like families, right? What's your secret sauce? What's going to be the thing that you go, wow, we really stayed up on the academics, or wow, my violin has really taken off, or I love playing bridge with my family of 4. I don't know what it will be, but that would be the coolest thing we could ever imagine, is that this terrible year with all the terrible things that go on with our limits and the impact on our communities and our essential workers, that we could say we did well in certain ways. That's perspective that would be very adaptive to have. Now, in terms of endurance, I have a confession to make. I've been giving talks on resilience since last century. I happen to know, I gave a grand rounds on it last century. And all the time I've talked about coping and resilience, I have never talked about endurance. And I asked myself why, and I said, you know, it was a little negative a little victim-y, a little martyr-y to say, oh, we have to endure this. And then I really questioned myself, why haven't I ever talked about this? Because my beginning research and so much of what I did at Children's Hospital was working with chronically ill people, children and their families. And those parents that have maybe a child with birth defects or a long-term disability or chronic disease, could be leukemia, could be terminal disease, they have to endure for a long haul that experience. So endurance is a beautiful thing. One of the things that we used to do was interview families once a month for the house staff and say, how are you dealing with this chronic condition in your family? And one of the things I learned is the parents really didn't like to be told that they were heroic, they were amazing to be going through this thing. And what they kept saying was, you would do it too. If your child had leukemia and looked like mine does right now with all these tubes and no hair, you would endure it, because that's what we do as families when we love our children. Endure it does not have to be a bad thing. What it means is I accept unpleasant circumstances over a long period of time. And I just finished a biography of Churchill during the first 2 years of the London Blitz, and I was inspired again. I'm inspired by chronic illness and families, and I'm inspired by families during the Blitz. They endured unpleasant circumstances for a long haul, and so I'm just not sugarcoating it anymore. It's a long haul of unpleasant circumstances that we're trying to make the best of. How do we do this optimally? Well, we know the brown bears moved to the Arctic, and it was very adaptive to turn white, because then, of course, hunters couldn't find them and other predators. We even know that polar bears used to they do know how to put their hands over their nose so that they could be all white. Now, that's clear to me. It's not clear to me how weird fish, when you go to the aquarium, don't you look at the fish and go, now, how is that adapted? How did they change so that was in their interest to look like that? And I put the crazy little fish in there because what I'm always amazed with families that always bring me to such humility is people figure out their secret sauce, their good ways of being, and it's really different. Some families are such high functioning, great families, and they're really slouchy, They just really don't have many rules, and it all works out for them. And some people are a little bit more hardcore with schedules, and that works out for them. We know that there's some key ingredients. That's what we're going to talk about today. But I think, again, we'll be doing it differently, and we want a wide berth for what's acceptable within safety standards, of course, of how families are going to endure this year. But one thing we know is it's really handy to adopt, a certain positive mindset. And I really don't mean this in a Pollyanna way. One of my favorite books of all time is Man's Search for Meaning. Do you all remember reading that if you went to your first year of college in humanities class? So Viktor Frankl, lived through the concentration camps during, the Holocaust, and he came out the other end, and people said, how did you come out of that with your attitude and with your perspective and your philosophy? He said, we all have a choice of an attitude. I'm choosing to survive and thrive. I'm inspired that if Viktor Frankl can do it, more of us can do it. Between a stimulus and a response, can be a pause where we have freedom to choose. That's Frankl. We have freedom, but we have to pause, because if it's stimulus reaction, we don't have any option. But between the stimulus and the reaction, there's a pause, and we can choose an attitude. That comes straight from Viktor Frankl, right? We can always choose an attitude. Human beings are unique. We think, and then we can think about thinking. We can do the Chicken Little thing, and we all do, and that's natural, accept ourselves for that. And then we say, and now I have some choices. I don't have to be on an infinite loop of how terrible this is. I can choose to see, how am I going to go through this with accepting myself, but also with some dignity and grace and generosity. So, it's not just about bouncing back, it's really about a mindset as well. Okay, so the big D for do healthy habits. Everybody talking about, okay, there's got to be, this is how you do it. You got to sleep, and you got to, control the screens, and you got to go get the groceries and healthy cooking. Apparently now we're supposed to all be doing sourdough bread. I don't know where that came from, but that's the deal. And of course, we got to do the homeschooling. We got to make sure mom and dad both have places to work. And then we've got to have time for the couple. Asterisk on that, my opinion so far, as an anthropologist, sociologist, watching everybody with lots of contact, I think we're underdoing the couples part. Okay, if you Q&A, bring that back, please. Underdoing the couples part. Really doing a lot for the kids and the groceries and the cleaning. I don't know about the couple. But we're supposed to fit in all that stuff. How are we going to do that? Now, I really want to say, yes, that's really good to have a routine, but it's not just about all that healthy stuff. It's that when you do the same thing the same way every day, kids and human beings do well with that because it takes advantage for the automatic pilot. You know, you get up in the morning, you usually do the same sequence. I get my brush, I brush my teeth, I go to the bathroom, I dress or I don't dress, I get my coffee. In our home, my husband is like a heat-seeking missile, just boom, coffee first. We all do the same thing, and we just go through with children, hopefully, a certain amount of routine, because if you do it the same way, it creates security and predictability to have that, whether you just had an earthquake or a hurricane. This has been studied. Routines are good for children. They know what to do next, right? Now, I told you there's going to be a lot of both and here. Stability is good, predictability is good, and flexibility. So we both and, right? I was so happy with this parent the other day who tends to be pretty much like this, very routinized. And she said her son woke up crying, hating school. He didn't want to go to school that day, go to the kitchen table. And she said, fine, let's just have a day off. And I'll call the teacher. For her, I was so proud of her. Again, for her, you know, that was a stretch. For another family that likes things a little bit loosey-goosey, you know, it'd be really the heavy lift to do the routine. So both and. The opposite of, you know, rigidity is, you know, chaos. We don't like either one. We like sort of a messy middle where we've got routines and stability and we have some flexibility. How much when? That's up to the wise mind parent. You know, that's why I use that term in my book, the intuitiveness of a parent balancing, what do I know? What do I feel? What's my best hunch? And kind of going with that. You know, the old Dr. Spock thing, you know more than you think you do when you kind of go into that deeper space of what's right for you. Okay, huge one, huge, is accepting loss. I mean, some people are now saying, okay, enough on the grief thing. No, we're going to continue to grieve things, and we never know which family member is going to have to take a grieving moment. But, you know, one of my clients is just verklempt about missing Little League. You know, he had this vision of going from Little League to the, you know, the All-Stars. And maybe that was unrealistic, but he's grieving. And we don't want to push kids to get through it. You know, Americans love to get over stuff and get through things, right? And whether it's the pandemic or negative emotions, it's best to make space and trust. One thing we know about emotions is that they come and they go. Bliss comes, which is delightful, it goes. But depressive feelings and anxiety feelings can come and go, like with that boy that took the day off, right? If they don't, that's when you have telehealth and telepsych and call the clinics that you saw sponsored there. Because if it's persistent and intense and the pattern isn't shifting, then you probably want to call a professional. But in the meantime, most of us just need to make space. Now, notice I crammed that other little agenda in there. One thing we could accomplish this year is more focus on emotional intelligence building, which is, of course, most of you know by now because your kids have it in their school. It's been around for 30 years. It's more predictive of success and good relationships and psychological health than SAT scores and straight A's. It's, you know, a process by which we recognize feelings, acknowledge feelings, manage feelings, called emotional regulation. How kids and adults learn to behave ethically and responsibly, care about themselves and others, compassion for self and others, develop positive and relationships and maintain them, and avoid risk-taking and alcohol problems. So I know that's 25 years worth of stuff, but we're not doing that as a thing we make kids do and, you know, try to say, what's your feeling? What's your feeling? How obnoxious. They'll never want to have a feeling if you do it. We model it. So an option for the year's goal could be modeling more emotional intelligence. The parents that model it are more likely to have the children that develop it. Okay, the next one of my favorites, practicing gratitude. Gratitude is very predictive of good outcomes, as we say in psychology. Martin Seligman, I did a great study years ago at Penn where he got a class of, I don't know if they were freshmen, but they were undergrads. They were all men at the time. And he controlled for all the variables. He gave them a positive psychology class. And then he had the control sample, and then he followed up 10 years later. And the guys that took the positive psychology class were healthier and happier in their relationships, more successful. They were healthier. And the biggest predictor was the practice that was every day for that whole semester about writing down 3 things I'm grateful for. Notice they're writing it down. They're not just flitting around thinking about it, they're writing it down. There's something about writing things down. You know, we identify the feeling with our right hemisphere. We form sentences with our left hemisphere. You know, so it's really important that it's written down. Very powerful to practice gratitude. And it can be at the dinner table, that can be a practice, but I just really want to put a plug in for gratitude. We can talk about compassion for self and others, loving kindness later if you'd like, because that's another part of it. The last one is taking time for pondering the opportunities in the crisis. Again, I know that some people are pushing for silver linings a little too much right now. We need to make time for that grief. But there are all sorts of silver linings of spending more time with our families and so forth. So that's up for everybody individually. Now, the next part, I'm going to talk about making some changes if people want to. Most people are very stressed, and all by living together intensely in the family. And of course, anybody that's parenting has a short list or a long list of what needs improvement. But one of the things we do in my field is we always stress acceptance before change. You know, this comes from dialectical behavior therapy, and this is some of the principles and the backbone of my last 2 books published by ParentMap. And we all want to do so well by our children that we get a little energetic about the change agenda, but change happens in the bedrock of acceptance. So a little mantra I have in the book is, I accept you exactly the way you are, and I know you want to do better. I accept myself exactly how I am, and I want to do a little bit better. So anything we talk about the rest of the time, we have to start with acceptance for the best, promise for change. Now, any question that I might be addressed the rest of the time, I want to say that we always need to think about other factors besides, like, if today I was asked about tantrums, and they said, what should I do about all these tantrums of our 5-year-olds? And then I scrolled back into last week and I found out how things have gotten harder and harder. And what we came up with is nothing except the tantrums. It's very unusual for her 5- and 6-year-olds to tantrum, but we found out all sorts of things ramped up, and they just probably need to, don't just sit there, do something. So, we need to always consider, what are the family dynamics behind any behavior? What are the temperament? I spent a long time in my article for ParentMap talking about how different temperaments are reacting to the pandemic and the sheltering in place. Temperament matters, developmental age and stage, family stressors, family dynamics. What's the history in all these things? Because they're going, I always say I like to go 20,000 feet up before I get into the specifics, into the weeds. And sometimes because of the way, we focus on something negative, and we get triggered and we focus right on the tantrums, we forget to do the wide angle lens. Well, what were the previous strengths and weaknesses? Now, the other thing is, I get teased sometimes by my own clients who say I'm a fanatic for self-care. And I am, because unless the parent is getting enough oxygen, they can't be very helpful, giving the mask have a whole new implication now. But we all remember when we first saw that on the airplane, first the mask to you and oxygen to you before the child. And we have to remember, and I'm seeing a lot of families deficient on self-care, but wanting to talk about the problems with their kids. I'm like, it doesn't work that way. We have to be oxygenated if we're going to oxygenate our problems. So self-care, got to come first. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about 3 families before we move to the Q&A, just to get us started. And one is Sparkly Sarah and Buddha Bob on a good day. On a bad day, it would be Spark Plug or Sparky Sarah, and instead of Buddha Bob, she would call him Bump on a Log Bob. He's really quiet. He's so dear. He's really quiet, and she's very bubbly. So it's one of those lots of word count, kind of not so much. And then she gets into doing all the nagging, and she really wanted to work on that. She had one of these problems, maybe some of you do too, where you thought of the quarantine and you thought, we'll all chip in. Now, I always think a man with a vacuum is a very attractive image, but she got attached to everybody wanting to chip in. And actually, Sarah is bubbly and fun, and her house is more likely to look like this. And so she would just go around all day long nagging, and then said, well, this isn't working. And then she wanted Buddha Bob to nag, and he said, why would I add to that? So they had to make a deal. And they worked this around in no time because they're really a pretty healthy family. But first they had to agree. She had to give up on some of her agenda. He had to kind of move to the middle. It's always great, 50% to the middle. First, they had to agree on what was expected of the children. And here's where the winning component came in. Her idea of having everything cleaned up once a day, she said, I'm good with that. I went, fantastic. One time a day, everything's clean. We can work with it. I mean, points for Sarah, right? And Bob said, I only have to lean in and really do a bunch of stuff for the kids one time a day, make sure they get all their chores done. Yeah, quid pro quo. It worked out really well. He has this Tibetan bell, I guess. He rings at 3, and then that's their reminder. And then he goes around and makes sure everything is done. And then he gives them quarters in mason jars. And it works for both of them. So that, this is an easy one. First of all, they never need to meet me. They're just hey, move to the next slide. They're mostly positive. See, this is in my last book, and this is 50 years of research. Ideally, whether you're going to have a happy, healthy family or do well in quarantine, you're going to stay mostly positive. Easier said than done. But about half of our interactions, if there was a bunch of psychologists looking through a one-way mirror, they'd want to see you hanging out and laughing and enjoying company or doing nothing or, going to your different places. But it would be a pretty positive environment. And then, of course, sometimes we've got an agenda. So we say thank you and please and, praise them, good job. And we might have routines where they get, like with Sarah and Bob, they give quarters for completion of extra chores. And then a small piece, that little black, pie piece is punishment. But a lot of times, because we're so hassled, we get in there and get punitive in our language or harsh statements or yelling or whatever, because we didn't know how to set up the program for ignoring a lot of behaviors, praising some, and just hanging out a lot. So this is very ambitious, but research has shown for many decades, many studies, that this is what we're hitting for. And then, of course, forgiveness for not meeting the grade. Now, this family is really struggling. This is Ambitious Amber and Good Time Gordy, and they have high conflict. And I'm worried about them because you see how this little boy feels. Ambitious Amber is quiet, but on the way to depressive. And she is one of these people that came from a neglectful home, and she came out very high achievement and has done spectacularly well. So is her husband. But her idea is, we see this sometimes in psychology where I didn't get this, so I'm going to ramp up, and they go 180 degrees in sort of, ambitious goals for children instead of stop at 90. And this is a little too much, sort of like too much fertilizer, too much of a good thing is a bad thing. And so she has such high expectations. She wants her kids to practice piano every day. Her daughter is, 9th grade, and she sees, she just had her sights on Columbia and Juilliard. By the way, I'm making up a lot of these cases with composites, so I don't violate the confidentiality of my kids. I just remembered I had to tell you that. So does she really want Juilliard? Maybe she's a boy. But the essence is the process. And unfortunately, she's really close with her daughter, and her husband, who's Good Time Gordy, as she calls him, is close with her son. And they are struggling to come to the middle, like Sarah and Bob. And one of the things that has helped our work, because we have so much work to do, is that she overheard her daughter telling her husband after an argument, if you guys get divorced, I want to go with Dad. Well, that has got to be the worst thing you ever hear, one of the worst things you ever hear. And the only good part about it is the mother realized that she really had to change her constant negative criticism of everybody in the family, because she, even though she criticizes dad for undermining, which he does, and not being empathetic to some of her positions and coming to the middle, which he has struggles with, she realizes that her bank account for good feelings is way low and her negatives way high. And her goal needs to be reversing that. And what we really need from dad is, even though he's a very involved father, he is very permissive. So you get that classic, she's authoritarian, he's permissive, and then they polarize and it gets worse. And so their goal during COVID, and there is the advantage of they have more time, and there's also the advantage of some of her high drive achievement, tutors every day, and all of her expectations for perfection are relaxed because everybody's going to have more room for other things than the big crank up, because you can't go out to lessons and performances. And I think this has allowed Amber to have a little bit more room to even get off that roller coaster herself. But we have to get them to move together. And what we also have to do is we need the parents to be close, and we have to break up the mother, daughter, father, son alliances. So we have to restructure things. And some of you might see that in your family, that there's alliances with one kid that you kind of, are more similar in temperament with, and then it makes you less best friends with your co-parent. So this is something, another new thing for a small adjustment in some families, but they're struggling. One last version. This is another family that doesn't need me, just needs to work on their business. They are so fun to be around. This is Ross, I think, in Friends, and Jennifer. But this is high energy, really, really, she is a bat out of hell. She is just moving. But what that means is she's got this high idol, and it's really easy for her to move into meltdown. And even though he's a super nice guy, he's kind of, when she's in a tirade, in a whirling dervish, he kind of just shrinks off and withdraws. And, instead of being benign, he can be abandoning. So my job with them, this is what we call the subjective units of distress scale. This is for kids, but it can work for all of us. It's sort of obvious that if she idles at a 4, it doesn't take much for her to flood. And so she ends up with some meltdown. Now you say, oh, well, then it must be her problem. Not so much. He's very judgmental, and instead of just telling her how he feels about, I think that we should go to the bedroom, maybe caucus about something, or, I'm feeling stressed because I feel like there's a lot of activity. He doesn't talk to her about how he feels. And of course, then he just slinks off, and, and so it's experienced as abandonment. But really, one thing we need to know about men, some of you women might think, oh, men are more shut down, they're more unemotional. They might be more repressed and suppressed, but research has shown, like when you get, put them in an fMRI and show them arousing things, they feel exactly as intensely as we do. But they have learned with the boy code, as you know, now clamp it down. When there's a lot of activity out there, I'm going to clamp it down more. Not all men, but certainly Brian, and he had no idea how he was sort of part of the system. He thought it was all about what I call her high energy Holly. He calls her hot-headed Holly, of course. And of course, both things are true. She's a little hot-headed. He's a little bit abandoning. We got to bring it toward the middle. And we're working on the calm protocol, that she wants to cool down. She needs to take a lot more time off for self-care, which really irritates her. But we need to get that idle down so she doesn't flood as quickly, and teach her how to, when she's really moving into the 7s, go to the bathroom, read People magazine, go to the window, do some meditating, so she can sort of catch her temper, and then go back and re-bridge with her children with empathy, and then maybe make a plan for repair. So those are sort of classic patterns I see, and I'm looking forward to specific questions from you. I want to end with this, which is interesting, because this is in the prologue of my last book with ParentMap, and I'm going to read it to you. Love isn't a state of perfect caring. It is an active noun like struggle. To love someone is to strive to accept that person exactly the way he is or she is, right here and right now, and to go on caring even through times that may bring pain. Now, interestingly, Elaine, I don't know if you noticed, but we stopped that prologue, that quote at accept the person exactly the way they are right here, right now. That's the way we stopped it. And how interesting is it that instead of going to my book, I went to the original quote and look what I left out. To go on caring even through times that may bring us pain. Endurance was there and I left it out. Isn't that, I knew my publisher would appreciate this version of it. And on that note, I'll send it to you, Elaine.
Thank you, Laura. First of all, as always, I learn every time I get to listen and think about the different ages and stages of our families, and love the Fred quote. I'm going to try to composite a few questions together. And I want to go back to the place that you started, because you were raising issues around couples, and there's a number of questions about how parents can be unified, how in the time when you have 3, 4 little kids around you, can you said elevate your emotional intelligence and model good behavior, and kind of talk us through, the emotion coaching for a couple to help one another in this space for themselves, and then to model good behavior to their families.
Thank you so much for that one. I can't imagine a better one to start with, because one of the things we see is that parents in the parenting, that verb, they're trying to get kids to do things like a kid will have a meltdown. Let's make him a 9-year-old that's having a meltdown. How are you feeling? And they're turning away. Why'd you do that? Just tell me why you did that. Were you feeling angry? They give feelings a bad reputation, right? Because it's at the kid's face, they're flooding. They might be feeling ashamed of hitting their sibling and then getting in trouble. And it's very much directed at the child. It can be really, really overstimulating. So one of the things I just say is, for a time, let's not even talk about the kids talking about their feelings. Let's put go to your search engine, print out 20, 30 words, that are words that describe negative emotions. It could be annoyed, irritated, threatened, scared, worried, anxious, and you use those words at the dinner table. I love when parents can decide, okay, from the day, I'm going to share that I got really irritated when my computer didn't work, and then the Zoom meeting didn't work, and then I found like I was harsh at some of the people that I was trying to collaborate with, and I'm really embarrassed. Look, I was anxious, I was embarrassed, I was irritated at people, and I think I used a tone, and I regret that. I need to really get calm. We're all going to get irritated. Would we want to give that guy the whole mason jar of quarters, or that woman for the most part? So I like to take a space of time, and again, this will be a year we have time, of just parents sharing their own feelings of sadness, sorrow, grief, irritated, annoyed, threatened, worried, just using that language and leaving the kids out of it. And then, I find that if parents are in a relaxed space, like maybe they're rubbing the feet of their kid, or they're rubbing their back, or they're doing, side by side, laying in the grass, looking at the sky. Often kids need to come on their own talking about their feelings. And then we might want to go, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I feel the same way sometimes. We don't want to get in their face and say, yes, and what else, and what else? So we really need to watch out to not overstimulate children when they're in those vulnerable moments. And so I would say, take the long view, and the first chunk of time, just model it with your spouse. It's the same thing with conflict, that we want to have conflict with our spouse in front of our children. Then we'll be modeling for our children. Are we respectful? Are we listening with empathy? Do we validate? So I just want to put a big plug in for model.
Such great behavior coaching. Here's a great one, and I think it's also really universal. I want to know how to handle sibling fighting and how to balance between being a drill sergeant with empathy, because the mess is absolutely making me crazy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, sibling, there's a book, I'm sure everybody's seen it, Siblings Without Rivalry. Without, that sounds black and white to me. Oh, forget it. It'll never be without rivalry. It will never be without fights. And what I always say, and I do think this is heightened somewhat, I have to say somewhat by the pandemic because of cabin fever, but like some families that you hear take a sabbatical and go spend a year in China or Brazil or something, sometimes more space when that's all there is and there's plenty of time, the sibling relationship might be enhanced this year. So let's take the long view. But with sibling conflict, I like to take I call it the hodgepodge. That, the book is fabulous in terms of inspiring us to go to one and then the other and validate their feelings and saying, let's come together and, share it. And you have the talking stick and see if we can resolve and maybe, do some problem solving about options for how to share the Xbox. I mean, it's great. Let's go for that. Just do that book whenever you can. I would say I got to that about 5% of the time as a parent. So, it's always great to be aspirational. I'm so embarrassed that I didn't do more of it. But the hodgepodge is, yeah, let's have that as a beacon. See if you can do that just the way the book says or on any website, in terms of sibling quarreling and how to, validate and negotiate. But some of the times you will yell at them and forgive yourself. Okay. And a lot of time I just say, break it up. You go to your room, it's good time for quiet time. And then when they get back together, it's kind of special. But when you think about sibling rivalry, it's what we say in biology is overdetermined, right? They share space, they share parents. Parents are often taking one side or another, depending on, unfortunately, what we perceive in the thresh of the moment. Then that actually incentivizes more setup and more conflict because they want to make sure the other one gets in trouble, right? There are so many reasons for conflict that we need to lower our goals for getting along. And in fact, if we shame them all the time, this should be your best friend, that's who you'll have after I'm gone in the future. I can't believe people say that. I know it's kind of true, but as Elaine would say, my book should be called You Might Be Right, but Are You Effective? Right? That's guilt tripping. So low goals for their getting along spontaneously for a long period of time. Most people say my generation, your generation gets in there too much and then we ruin everything. We should probably hear a little squabbling, go to the other part of the house or go out back, because sometimes when they don't have a viewer, they get along better. So that's another technique, right? So we've got the gold standard. We've got, okay, you'll yell and forgive yourself. You've got separate them, divide and conquer, I call it. You won't listen to one over the other, say, I wasn't there, I don't know. And sometimes you'll do a chain and figure out what happened and problem solve. But I just have to go for hodgepodge and low goals. Is that okay to say?
That's perfect. And I have to repeat one of my favorite Laura Kastner lines. You may be right, but are you effective? Thank you for that. I'm going to go back to one of the first questions posed. How does a parent know when a child reaches a point where anxiety goes too far beyond the normal, abnormal response to events so that professional help might be necessary?
Yes. Well, I'm glad you asked this because I've already several times in this last 8 weeks told people that it's time to do telehealth. And people are, oh, you can do that? And I'm like, yes. Children's Hospital has it all set up. All my fellows are open for business, child psychiatry. And, the sponsor, CATS, Child and Teen Solutions, and Seattle Psychology, and EBTCS downtown, they're all open for business, just so you know. And it's fine to get started with telehealth. It's a little awkward, but, I know from supervising my fellows, you meet your therapist and they pick up their cat. And I think sometimes kids do better doing this. It's more private. They can share their pets. It's really interesting how there are some advantages to starting therapy for kids online. It's really quite interesting. So don't be inhibited. Now, I always say the same thing. If it's frequent, if it's persistent, if it's really intense, And it doesn't move. The grief isn't moving. The anxiety, the meltdowns aren't moving at all. Because as I said, most come and go. There should be highs and lows. It shouldn't be persistent and intense. So I would say don't be inhibited. If you see it persisting, it has been 9 weeks and it's not going to get better. And everybody's grieving, but they usually have highs and lows. Yeah.
Great. Okay. We'll try to fit a couple more in. Here's one I think that is also has a universal feel to it. My 5th grader is actually depressed, not just missing his friends or feeling anxious about the coronavirus. How can I gently help him out of this slump while respecting his feelings? He's flatly refused to talk to any type of counselor or professional.
Okay. Well, refusing I hear this all the time, obviously. I've never met any young girl with an eating disorder that's dying to go to therapy because they're going to make me, gain weight. Anorexia, they're going to make drugs, people that like their drug use, and it's really part of partying. They don't want to go to a therapist. So I'm used to it. My experience, if parents are concerned and they're united and they sit with their child and say, this is your health, I'm in charge. You're not in charge. If you can't take care of your own health, if these things just don't move through, then it's our job to make sure you get help, because if you had a broken leg, I'd make sure that you got it set and you got a cast. And with this depression not moving, I'm going to insist that we seek well-being because you deserve to feel better. So if parents are really calm, they're united, and they're very clear and unambivalent about we're never perfect physically, we go to a physical doctor. We're never perfect emotionally, we go to an emotional doctor. So we got to get through the taboo that there's anything bad about some people don't want to go to a physical doctor either with, an infection or whatever. So you can be inhibited both ways, but we have a taboo in our culture as if it means something, that you're weak or something. We don't feel that with the broken leg or the lupus, but somehow we feel that way, but we're never going to be perfect emotionally. So I think part of it is the parents getting over their ambivalence and being calm, united, and very direct.
Great. Okay. My kid feels an acute loss of control over his days, having lost everything, nearly everything, that gives him structure: school, sports, clubs, friends. And instead of trying to exert control over himself by refusing to do schoolwork, music practice, chores, or fun things like board games, in other words, he's being a huge pain in the ass. We're all already stressed.
Yeah. Well, again, if it's that bad and there's no joy, this is just like the last 2 questions. If there really is no movement, they won't do any of the activities of daily living. That's one of the definitions of, poor mental health, is you can't do ADLs. So he's not doing ADLs. He can't experience joy, even fun things. The last 2 questions, it's time for telehealth. I'd make an appointment and be unambivalent about it. It's been 8 weeks and we're not moving through this. So now, of course, if I met the parents, I'd say, now let's look at the big picture. If they're mostly negative, if they've been not accepting his grief, if they've been, kind of prodding him too much, maybe they need to do like ambitious Ember and flip it upside down and start having party time for a while, and maybe he'd come out of it. So I don't know he needs telehealth because I haven't talked to the parents. So there's one, he either needs teletherapy and they need to move on it, or they might want to look at their whole picture and saying, is it the fish in the fish tank, and maybe it's the fish tank, or maybe, because maybe if they change the environment some and they weren't as intense, or maybe they've been so negative and critical, it had to do with his mood. But either way, they probably need an evaluation.
Good advice. I'm going to throw one last one in there, because how fun to land, not for this parent, on an issue with a kid that spits a lot at his parents. And this mom is just saying she tries so hard to lean in and get him to stop. It happens during transitions often.
What's the age, Elaine? Do you know the age?
4.
4, right. Okay, so the good thing is 4, oh gosh, they can do all sorts of stuff at 4, right? Now, when you hear of a specific thing like spitting or hitting or, pulling hair, you always want to start with, oh, spitting during COVID. I wonder if the first time he did that, Elaine, if the parents gave attention to it. Do you think? Do you think maybe they went, oh, he's spitting? So one of the things that would be my first hypothesis, is that during COVID, they had a certain reaction to the spitting. So, you know, with under 5-year-olds, the first thing for annoying behaviors should be ignore, right? Not punish, just ignore. Or maybe even something silly, like starting to sing happy birthday or something, like, oh, he's doing the spitting thing. I think I'll do the thing that annoys me or entertains me. I think I'll sing a happy birthday to me or something. Just so that anything other than giving attention, because with under 5-year-olds, if you're doing something annoying, ignore should be the first. We call it planned ignoring. You know, if they're screaming, it's really hard. I think it's, and so I'm going to put it in screaming because you can't fake that you're hearing that. That's why doing something like jump, we call it jump the tracks, doing something a little non sequitur, but no attention for spitting. They probably said don't spit. And they went, that's like giving kids like Skittles, right? Don't spit. It's like, here, have some Skittles, because it's attention. All kids love attention. So I don't mean to be glib, but the beauty of this is they're 4, and it's so normal to explore behaviors that are powerful. Like spitting is powerful. I mean, can you imagine the rubbernecking that goes on for anyone? But yeah, I'd start really vigilant, ignore, and maybe a non sequitur, and see where that goes.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to remind people, Getting to Calm is always available. And thank everyone for joining, and also thank all of our sponsors. And you will all get emails with a recording of today's discussion. And we hope you have a great afternoon. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Elaine, and thank you, ParentMap. Good luck with self-care.